September 15, 1944. Dawn broke over the Pacific Ocean like bruised iron. We huddled inside the steel hull of our amtrac, 50 boys trembling to the diesel hum. The ocean air was already burning. By 7 in the morning, the tropical thermometer on the flagship touched 115 degrees. Sweat stung our eyes before the first shot was fired. Major General Rupertus had told us this would be a walkover. 4 days, he said. A quick strike to secure an airstrip for MacArthur. We actually believed him. Through the narrow observation slits, the island of Peleliu appeared as a jagged sliver of green smoke, pounded relentlessly by the massive 16-inch naval guns of our battleships. The bombardment seemed capable of leveling mountains. Coral dust drifted into the morning sky like flour, and for a brief second we thought nothing could survive that firestorm. Then our steel tracks scraped against the submerged coral reef, hundreds of yards from the shore. The roar of our engine choked, and the whole world went terrifyingly silent. That silence lasted 3 seconds. Then the reef erupted. Mortar shells rained vertically from the ridge, tearing into the water, churning the blue surf into foam and jagged shrapnel. The amtrac next to ours took a direct hit on its fuel tank. In an instant, 30 men vanished behind a roaring wall of black smoke and scarlet flame. "Ramp down! Go, go, go!" Sergeant Miller screamed, his voice cracking against the thunder. My boots hit the shallow water, dragging my 40-pound pack through the sucking reef. Orange Beach was not sand. It was a jagged terrace of crushed coral and burning metal, raked by interlocking heavy machine gun fire from pillboxes we couldn't even see. Men were falling before their boots touched the dry coral. In the first 30 minutes alone, more than 500 Marines collapsed along that narrow strip of shoreline. I pressed my cheek against the burning coral ground, my fingernails bleeding as I tried to dig into solid rock. You cannot dig a foxhole in razor-sharp limestone. Beside me lay young Billy from Ohio. His helmet had rolled away into the surf, his eyes staring blankly at the sky, holding a crumpled photograph of his mother. The beach was clogged with burning tractors, shattered supply crates, and the cries of the wounded calling for Navy corpsmen who were already pinned beneath the fire. The sun climbed higher, baking our steel helmets into ovens. We had traveled 7,000 miles across the ocean, only to find ourselves trapped in the jaws of an island that wanted to swallow us whole. By midday, the order came crackling through the field radio. We had to push inland and seize the airfield, 500 yards of open, naked ground. Between the palm fringe and the coral runway, there was no grass, no trees, no shelter, just shimmering heat waves rising off the baked white crushed coral tarmac. And looming above the runway stood the jagged gray silhouette of the Unbreakable mountain, watching us like a silent, hollow-eyed stone giant. Colonel Chesty Puller gave the signal. We stood up from the shallow depressions, fixed bayonets, and began walking directly into the open furnace of the airfield. It was madness, running across 500 yards of flat runway with heavy packs, while every heavy artillery tube on the high ridges zeroed in on our boots. The Japanese 47mm anti-tank guns opened up from the hills, skipping shells across the flat tarmac like stones on a frozen pond, tearing through our ranks. The heat was suffocating. Men were collapsing not just from bullets, but from heat exhaustion, their tongues swollen black, gasping for air in the 115-degree sun. I ran until my lungs burned with sulfur and dust. Beside me, my buddy Joe fell hard, clutching his knee, screaming for me to keep moving forward. We threw ourselves into the bomb craters on the far side of the runway, our uniforms soaked in salt and blood, our canteens completely empty. The 1st Marine Regiment had taken catastrophic losses. In less than 48 hours, more than half of our assault company was gone, wiped off the morning muster rolls. We looked back across the airfield. It was littered with abandoned gear, disabled tanks, and the quiet silhouettes of friends who would never walk home. Yet the most terrifying realization was just beginning to dawn on us. We had captured the airfield, but we had not seen a single living Japanese soldier. Colonel Nakagawa had abandoned the old doctrine of feudal bonsai charges on the beach. He had taken his 10,000 men underground, deep into the limestone core. Every ridge above us was honeycombed with reinforced concrete bunkers, steel blast doors, and interlocking firing slits carved invisibly into the ancient coral rock. The 4-day campaign had vanished like smoke. Ahead of us lay the jagged labyrinth of the Umbrogel and the long descent into subterranean darkness. The Umbrogel was not a mountain. It was a twisted nightmare of jagged limestone pinnacles, steep ravines, and knife-edged coral canyons that shredded our boots and uniforms. Beneath these jagged ridges lay over 500 interconnected caves, fortified with steel doors, underground hospitals, ammo depots, and sliding armored artillery shields. We had to fight for every single yard uphill, climbing on our hands and knees under plunging machine gun fire that echoed like thunder in the narrow gorges. Conventional artillery was useless against the mountain. 10,000-pound bombs merely stripped the jungle foliage, exposing the white, bone-like coral rock beneath. To eliminate a single cave, a squad had to crawl forward under sniper fire, haul heavy satchel charges of dynamite, and heave them into the dark openings. The enemy would wait until we reached the mouth, then toss the dynamite back down the slope, or open fire through hidden ventilation shafts behind our backs. But the greatest enemy was not the bullets. It was the unrelenting, maddening thirst that drove men to the brink of insanity. The water drums brought ashore had previously been used to store aviation fuel. The water came out brownish red, tasting of oil and rust, burning our throats as we drank. We rationed our water drop by drop, moistening our cracked lips with filthy handkerchiefs, dreaming of cold mountain streams back home in Pennsylvania and Iowa. I remember crouching behind a limestone boulder for 8 hours, sharing half a canteen of oily water with Sergeant Miller, while sniper bullets chipped the stone above. Miller didn't speak of tactics. He took a worn pencil from his pocket and showed me a sketch of his daughter's 5th birthday party, drawn on the back of a ration box. "Just get back to San Francisco, Tom," he whispered, wiping gray coral dust from his weathered face. "That's the only objective that matters now." Around us, the air smelled of cordite, burning diesel, and the sweet, sickening stench of decay trapped in the stagnant tropical crevices of the ridge. By the second week on Peleliu, the 1st Marine Division was ground down to the marrow. Whole battalions were reduced to company strength, commanded by young lieutenants. We had renamed the peaks: Bloody Nose Ridge, 5 Sisters, Death Valley. Names carved into our memory with the permanence of stone. When the sun finally dipped beneath the Philippine Sea, a different kind of terror crawled out from the crevices of the coral labyrinth. Tropical night fell with absolute pitch-black weight. In the foxholes, you could not see your own hand held 2 inches before your open eyes. Every rustle of dry coral gravel, every draft of wind through the limestone fissures, sounded like an infiltrator creeping forward with a bayonet. We sat in pairs, back to back, knives unsheathed, under strict orders never to fire our rifles at night, lest the muzzle flash reveal our exact positions. High above the ridges, our Navy destroyers launched white phosphorus illumination flares that drifted slowly downward on silk parachutes. The eerie, swaying magnesium light cast long, dancing shadows across the rock face, turning every twisted tree stump into a lunging phantom. Then the shadows would suddenly freeze as the flare hissed into the dark ocean, leaving us in a blindness far deeper and more terrifying than before. Japanese night raiders, moving barefoot with grenades taped to their chests, would slip through our perimeter gaps, seeking out our command posts and mortar pits. You would hear a sudden intake of breath, a muffled struggle in the dark, the brief flash of a blade, and then suffocating silence would swallow everything again. Nobody slept. You learned to live on adrenaline, cold canned rations, and the quiet, rhythmic sound of your foxhole buddies breathing beside you. In those endless hours before dawn, all the bravado of the recruitment posters evaporated. You realized how fragile a 19-year-old human life really was. You thought of your childhood bedroom, the sound of rain on the tin roof back home, your mother setting the breakfast table, wondering if they were thinking of you. When the gray light of dawn finally touched the jagged horizon, we would count our squad members in silence, checking who was still breathing beside us. By mid-October, the remnants of the 1st Marine Division were finally relieved by the Army's 81st Infantry Division. We stumbled down the coral paths like ghosts. We thought we had survived the worst that war could ever invent, but the Pacific was not finished with us. 4 months later, another island was waiting. February 19th, 1945. 8 square miles of volcanic sulfur and desolate black rock rose out of the mist. Iwo Jima. From the deck of our transport ship, the island smelled distinctly of rotten eggs, an active volcano venting sulfur fumes into the cold northern Pacific drizzle. Dominating the southern tip stood Mount Suribachi, 550 feet of sheer volcanic stone, shaped like a dormant monster overlooking the sea. The Navy had bombarded the island for 3 consecutive days, dropping 20,000 tons of shells. We were told again that nothing could possibly be alive. At 9 in the morning, our landing crafts churned through the gray surf, slamming onto the steep terraces of Red Beach beneath the shadow of Suribachi. As soon as our boots hit the shore, we sank. The beach was made of fine, powdery volcanic ash that collapsed under our weight like loose grain. Every step forward was like wading through a sand dune. Our heavy combat boots slipped backward, while 30-ton Sherman tanks bogged down to their axles in the ash. And for the first 20 minutes, there was no gunfire, not a single shot, just the heavy sound of our breathing and the crashing surf behind our backs. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi was waiting. He had ordered his artillery commanders not to fire until the beaches were completely packed with thousands of Marines. When the trap was sprung, it was instantaneous. Heavy mortars, coastal defense guns, and rocket batteries opened fire simultaneously from hundreds of hidden bunkers across Suribachi. The black beach erupted in geysers of dark volcanic ash and shrapnel. There was nowhere to hide, no rocks to get behind, only the soft ash that caved into our faces. Mortar shells fell with mathematical precision, walking lines of destruction up and down the crowded terraces, flipping landing craft like toys in the surf. "Get off the beach! Move inland or die here!" the officers screamed. We crawled on our bellies through the sulfur dust, pushing forward inch by bloody inch. Corpsmen knelt in the open ash, desperately tying tourniquets while shrapnel sheared through their medical packs, earning medals they would never live to wear. By nightfall on D-Day, over 2,400 Marines lay dead or wounded along the black sands, trapped between the sulfuric earth and the freezing sea. Kuribayashi had constructed something the world had never seen: 16 miles of subterranean tunnels linking 1,500 reinforced blockhouses and underground bunkers. It was a complete underground city, equipped with electricity, water cisterns, hospital wards, and command posts buried 30 to 50 feet beneath the solid volcanic rock. The Japanese soldiers did not defend Iwo Jima to survive. Each man had sworn an oath to take 10 American lives before falling for his emperor. We could not fight them with rifles alone. We had to use the most terrifying weapons in our arsenal: the heavy M22 flamethrower and satchel charges of C2 plastic explosive. The flamethrower operators were the bravest men on the island, carrying 70 pounds of volatile napalm on their backs. Their life expectancy in combat was measured in minutes. A Marine would crawl to within 20 yards of a concrete firing pillbox, while riflemen laid down covering fire to pin the gunners inside the bunker slit. Then the flamethrower would unleash a roaring jet of liquid fire, banking the blaze into the embrasure, consuming all oxygen inside the concrete chamber in seconds. Behind the flame came the demolition team, hurling 50-pound satchel charges into the smoking entrance, followed by the dull, bone-jarring underground thump of high explosives. Yet hours later, the same bunker would open fire on our rear lines, The enemy was simply moving through deep underground tunnels from other parts of the island. On the fourth morning, February 23, I looked up from a shell crater toward the wind-whipped crest of Mount Suribachi. Through the smoke and sulfur mist, a small group of Marines from the 28th Regiment was raising a steel pipe with an American flag into the sky. Down along the beaches and out across the transport fleet, ship horns began blowing, and wounded men lifted their heads from stretchers to cheer in hoarse voices. It was a magnificent moment of hope, but every veteran on that line knew the bitter truth. Suribachi was only the southern tip of the island. Ahead of us lay the main defensive lines to the north, the Meatgrinder, Hill 382, Turkey Knob, and the desolate amphitheater known as the Amphitheater. The battle for Iwo Jima was not over. In fact, 4 weeks of the bloodiest fighting in Marine Corps history were just beginning. Northern Iwo Jima was a jagged wasteland of sulfur pits, steaming rock crevices, and shattered stone ridges where artillery shells cracked open vents of boiling subterranean steam. At Hill 382, dubbed the Meatgrinder, we fought for 10 continuous days over a piece of ground no larger than a football field, losing hundreds of men for every dozen yards. You could smell the battle from miles away. A sickening mixture of volcanic sulfur, burnt gunpowder, charred rubber, and human suffering baked beneath the damp skies. We were filthy beyond recognition. Our green utility uniforms were stained gray with volcanic dust, our faces hollow, our eyes sunken with the 1,000-yard stare of exhaustion. In the brief pauses between artillery barrages, mail from home finally reached the front lines, carried forward in waterproof canvas bags by exhausted runners. I sat inside a blackened shell hole, trembling as I opened a letter from my mother in Ohio. She wrote about her garden, the neighbor's new puppy, and how proud the town was. The normalcy of that other world seemed like a dream from 1,000 years ago, written on paper that smelled of lavender and clean American air. Beside me, Sergeant Miller carefully folded a photograph of his wife into his breast pocket, next to his dog tags, before checking the magazine of his Thompson submachine gun. "When we get home, Tom," he said softly, looking out over the smoking volcanic ridges, "we're going to build a cabin in the Oregon pines. Nothing but green trees and silence." 2 hours later, in the narrow ravines of Cushman's Pocket, a sniper's bullet found Miller's chest as he stepped out to drag a wounded teenage private back to safety. I held his hand as the rain began to fall, washing the gray volcanic ash from his weathered forehead, his grip growing weaker until the breathing finally stopped. There was no time to weep. The barrage started again, and you had to keep firing, keep crawling, keep pushing your humanity deep down into a dark, frozen corner of your soul. By late March, the organized resistance on Iwo Jima had been compressed into a single narrow ravine near Kitano Point, known simply as the Gorge. On March 26, the final desperate counterattack came. 300 remaining defenders made a silent, coordinated breakthrough in the darkness before dawn. When the morning light broke over the sea, the battlefield was completely silent. After 36 days of ceaseless fury, the island of Iwo Jima was officially secured. Before we boarded the troop transports to leave the island, we walked down to the 5th Marine Division Cemetery near the base of Mount Suribachi. Row upon row of simple white wooden crosses and stars of David stood in perfect, silent formation against the dark, desolate volcanic ash. Over 6,800 American boys were buried in that black soil. Nearly 20,000 more were carried away on hospital ships, mangled in body and mind. I knelt beside Miller's cross, pressing my hand against the cold painted wood, leaving his daughter's sketch tucked beneath his dog tag chain in the soft earth. Our transport ship slowly pulled away from the shoreline, churning the deep Pacific blue as the silhouette of Iwo Jima receded into the gray horizon. Out of the 250 young men who had boarded the amtracs with my company on Peleliu's D-Day, only 28 of us were standing on that deck. We looked at one another with hollow eyes, carrying wounds that no surgeon's scalpel could ever reach, wondering why we had been spared while better men had fallen. The Pacific War would claim over 100,000 Allied soldiers and hundreds of thousands of Japanese lives before the atomic skies brought an end to the madness. Decades have passed since those fiery days on the coral reefs and sulfur sands. The gray hair has come, and the world has moved forward into modern light. Yet whenever the night falls quiet, and the wind whistles through the window panes, I am 19 years old again, crouching in the dark of a Pacific foxhole. I see their faces. Billy from Ohio, Joe, Sergeant Miller, young boys with brave smiles who gave all their tomorrows so that we might have our today. They do not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the passing years condemn their memory to the shadows. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the quiet willingness to hold the line for the brother beside you when the whole world is turning to ash. The white crosses on the black sands have weathered into history, but their sacrifice remains an eternal whisper across the vast and lonely ocean. To those who fought in the dark of the caves, and to those who never came home, you are remembered, you are honored, and you will never be forgotten. Thank you for watching this story of honor and sacrifice. Please subscribe for more historical narratives.